Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on.
Gentlemen, I am pain.
My Stalker, submitted by Erica. For a long time, I thought stalking was something that would only happen to other people. Girls in movies who ignored red flags, or stories I read on Reddit and whatnot. Well, I was wrong. And sometimes it doesn't have tons of red flags to start out with. Sometimes, and in my case, it starts with something as small and as harmless as a high school crush. His name was Daniel. I won't use his last name. We had AP English together in our junior year of high school. He sat 2 rows behind me and used to answer questions in a quiet voice, like he'd rehearsed them in his head. He wasn't popular, but he wasn't also an invisible guy either. He was just kind of there, one of those kinds of kids in high school, just always there. Junior year, he asked me to prom, and I had plans to go with a bunch of friends. We weren't taking dates. He smiled really wide and just said, "Hey, maybe next year." But alas, I had a boyfriend the following year, and when he did ask me, despite knowing that I had a boyfriend, I had to turn him down again. Then it seemed like minutes later I was leaving for college 3 hours away, and quite frankly, I never really thought about Daniel. Until I found out he had kind of followed me. Now, I didn't know that at first, of course. Freshman year at my university felt like freedom. I had all kinds of new friends and was having all the fun late nights, campus coffee shops, and lots of parties, and of course school too. But about 2 months in, I found the first note. It was folded neatly on my dorm room desk, and I assumed that my roommate had left it there, but it wasn't in their handwriting. The paper had been torn from a spiral notebook, and it said, "You always liked autumn. The leaves here are almost as pretty as you." There was no signature, and I laughed it off. I figured someone in my literature class was maybe fooling around, just maybe some awkward flirtation. The funny thing is I really didn't dwell too much on how it had ended up in my room. I just figured maybe I left my door unlocked. Yeah, I know, not very safe. But then I found another note, tucked into an economics textbook I had while I was studying at the library. It said, "Blue is still your color. I'm glad you didn't change that about yourself." I happened to have been wearing a blue sweater that day, and that made my skin crawl a little bit. But I told myself it was coincidences. College campuses are pretty small worlds despite how big some of them are. And then I thought maybe someone from high school went here too and I just didn't know it. I posted in the alumni group chat on Facebook from our graduating class joking about a secret admirer, and no one responded seriously. But that's when the sightings started. At first, it was just a feeling, like someone was watching me in the dining hall. I would look up and catch a glimpse of someone turning away very quickly, and I only could see that they had brown hair and were of average height, but something about him seemed familiar. I just blamed it on anxiety. It wasn't until spring semester that I saw him clearly. I was leaving a lecture and froze. He was leaning against a brick pillar outside of the building, hands in his jacket pockets. No mistake this time. It was Daniel. He looked older, but somehow the same. The same careful eyes and the slouch that he had that I could recognize anywhere. He smiled when he saw me and said, "Hey, Erica." I remember the way my stomach dropped for some reason. "Daniel? What are you doing here?" I said. I remember him just shrugging and saying, I transferred. I figured I needed a change. A change to my school." I said, "You didn't say anything to me or on the alumni page." And he said, "Well, I thought it would just be a nice surprise." Surprise. I forced a polite smile, and we chatted awkwardly for a few minutes. He said that he had decided to major in business, that he'd always wanted to go here, but he didn't get in when he applied out of high school. He didn't mention the notes, and neither did I. But after that, he seemed to appear everywhere. If I was in the campus cafe, there he was. If I was at the library studying, there was Daniel. And once, outside of my dorm building, I saw him at night just hanging around under a tree. When I saw him a few days later, I mentioned that, and he said, "Oh, I just happened to be walking by." But to get back to the notes, they continued. I got one that said, "You look tired. I wish you'd let me take care of you." And another one that said, "You know, you shouldn't trust that girl you study with. She talks shit about you behind your back." That one really got to me. I mean, whoever was writing these, obviously we know now, how did he know who I was studying with? I started to put two and two together and figured, yes, this has got to be Daniel. So I confronted him when I saw him in our student union one afternoon. "Are you leaving me notes?" I said, point blank, keeping my voice steady. He blinked at me and said, "Notes?" And I said, "Yeah, someone's been putting them in my books and leaving them on my desk." He just looked at me deeply for a minute and said, "You know, that's pretty creepy. I'd be careful if I were you." His expression was so convincingly concerned that I almost believed him. Almost. But after that, I started making sure my dorm room door was always locked, even when I just ran down the hall to shower. I talked to my roommate about it, and she said yes, she would be more vigilant about that as well. College went on, and for the next 3 years, I would see Daniel every now and again. But I'd also mastered the art of avoiding him as best I could. I changed my daily patterns frequently. I didn't study in the same spot more than once a week. We had 2 gyms on campus, and I switched back and forth between them, so I wasn't leaving any kind of pattern of when I was there. And any time that he reached out to me on any social platform, I either blocked him or declined it. But nonetheless, he graduated the same year I did. Business degree, magna cum laude. Impressive. He sent me a message the week after graduation from yet another account. It simply said, "Feels like we're starting the next chapter together." I didn't respond. I took a job in another city, even farther away from home, another 3 hours away from the place that I had gone to college. I had landed a marketing job at a mid-sized tech firm, and honestly, for some reason, it felt like an escape, like a clean break. I wasn't in my hometown anymore, and I was no longer a part of the college that I had just spent the last 4 years at. But 2 months into the job, HR sent out their normal weekly flyer introducing new hires, and someone in the business analytics department looked familiar, because it was. There was his face on my screen, Daniel. It felt like the room tilted a bit when I saw his headshot. I had a good friend in HR, and one day over lunch I kind of mentioned Daniel and asked how he'd found out about the job. And she told me, well, he just applied like anybody else and had great references, and it was one of the best interviews they had for the position. I went back to my desk feeling a little queasy, and I honestly considered quitting, but I needed the money, and technically, Daniel hadn't ever done anything illegal. But then small things started happening. He would leave coffee on my desk. He would send internal company messages to me saying things like, "Great presentation today," or "That was really impressive what you said." We had an elevator in our building, and if we were both in it, it just felt like he was always standing too close to me. And then one afternoon, I found a sticky note on my computer monitor. It said, "I moved for you. Doesn't that mean anything?" My heart started to hammer so loudly I thought my coworkers would hear it. I went directly over to his desk and said, "Look, Daniel, you need to stop. Stop following me, stop leaving me things, stop showing up in every corner and facet of my life." He looked up from his desk and said, "Stop what?" And I said, "This," and handed him the sticky note. "This and all of it," I said. "Just stop." He looked down and looked back up at me and said, "I'm just trying to show you that I care." And I said, "That's great. I don't want you to." And then his expression shifted. The softness seemed to drain away from his face. He looked at me and quietly said, "You used to smile at me in English class. You don't get to pretend I don't exist now." That was it. I reported him to HR. They gave him a warning, and he denied doing anything, but I did have the evidence of the sticky note. But they said that wasn't also evidence. It could have been anyone. My friend even pulled me aside and said that maybe I was misinterpreting friendly gestures. But the notes escalated after that, just not at work. They were appearing taped to my apartment door. Notes like, "You can't ignore me forever." There was another one on my car windshield one morning. "Why are you making this harder than it needs to be?" And one night, I found my apartment doormat turned upside down, and beneath it was a photograph. It was a picture of me entering my building, taken from across the street. That freaked me out, because no one should have known where I was living. I went to the police. They took a report but said unless he threatened me directly or harmed me, their hands were tied and there wasn't much they could do. The officer actually said, "Well, he hasn't crossed any lines yet." Well, maybe he hadn't at that point, but he was about to. As a matter of fact, the following Friday, he did. I had stayed late at work, and it was almost 10 p.m. when I pulled into my apartment's parking lot. I remember the air was really cold, and it just seemed very quiet outside. I sensed him before I saw him. Daniel stepped out from between two parked cars. "Erica," he said, like we were just meeting for coffee. I backed up towards my car and said, "What are you doing here?" "I needed to talk to you," he said. And I said, "Bro, it's like 10 at night." He said, "Well, you never answer my messages." And I retorted quickly with, "I told you to leave me alone." His face made a weird twitch, and he said, "You're embarrassed of me." And I said, "No, Daniel, I'm afraid of you." And that seemed to snap something inside him. "I did everything right," he shouted. "I went to your college. I got the degree that you had. I moved here. I got a job in the same company as you. Why the fuck can't you see that I've proved that I'm good enough?" I turned to run, and he grabbed my arm. The world narrowed to his fingers digging into my skin. It's all I could think of. He screamed at me, "You don't get to ignore me after everything I've done." I kicked him as hard as I could and twisted free and ran towards my apartment's entrance. He ran after me, lunged, and caught the back of my coat and dragged me to the ground. My head cracked off the pavement, and for a moment I couldn't see straight. Then he was on top of me. His breath was hot and furious and was going on and on about, "If you would have just said yes, if you would have just said yes," and I could feel him starting to rip my coat open. That's when the building door burst open. My neighbor, Mrs. Klein, had heard the shouting, and she screamed and dialed 911. Daniel kept pawing at me like he was going to rape me or something, and then we heard sirens wailing in the distance. He just stood up slowly, raised his hands, and waited for the cops as if this was just some kind of misunderstanding. When they got out of their cars and told him to step away from me, he kept saying over and over, "It's not what it looks like." I just lay on the ground crying and shaking, staring up at the night sky as police lights flooded the area in their red and blue. This time, they did arrest him. They charged him with assault, stalking, harassment. And when they searched his car, they found a box in the trunk. And inside were years of things, photos of me from high school, printouts of my college schedules, copies of my company bio he'd obviously printed out at work, and a notebook filled with dates and times, where I'd been, who I'd talked to, and what I'd been wearing. There were pages and pages of observations. And there was also a printed map of directions to my apartment complex from his, with certain areas circled. The detectives later told me he'd been planning to confront me in private if I didn't respond to him soon. When the restraining order hearing came, I finally saw the full picture. He really had applied to Westbrook the semester after I committed. He had changed his major to match mine freshman year before switching back to business. He'd actually gotten a maintenance man to let him borrow a uniform so he could access my dorm building once. I hadn't imagined any of this stuff, and I wasn't crazy. That quiet, not popular, but not invisible guy from AP English in high school had built an entire life around me. And when I didn't fit the script he'd written in his head, he tried to force me into it. I didn't see him after that. I did hear he's done jail time for something else. But sometimes I still find myself scanning parking lots before getting out of my car. Sometimes I expect to see him leaning against a wall, smiling like our meeting was fate. But none of this was fate, man. It was a sick obsession. I'm glad it's behind me now. I'm glad I will never have to see him again. I hope that I don't. And the scariest thing that I still live with, though, if my neighbor hadn't been home when she was, I don't know how far Daniel would have gone to make sure I never ignored him again. Me and my friend got chased in the woods one night by Selector Melodic. At the time this happened, I was 13 and my friend had just turned 16. We're both female, but me and my friend, for the sake of the story, let's call her Amy, were bored at my home and my dad was away from the house, leaving us home alone. We wanted to go shopping in this one place that I told her about, but it was getting a bit late, maybe around 7 p.m. We figured it would still be open. However, the shop was quite far from my house, but I did know a shortcut being through the woods. Taking that shortcut was our biggest mistake. We left the house and it was still fairly bright outside. We were just walking and talking as we went through the woods. There was rarely anyone ever in there, apart from maybe some old man walking his dog. And I used to go through those woods as a child with my parents, and I always thought of it as being safe. We mindlessly walked along until I did notice a man with his hood up, and he was smoking. I whispered to Amy, "Hey, look," and she grabbed my arm. Just to be safe, we both went around him so he wouldn't see us, but we're pretty sure he did. The sun began to set when we reached the shop, and that's when we realized it was closed, so we just turned back the same way we had come. We completely forgot about the encounter we had like 10 or 20 minutes prior. We were just talking and laughing. I looked in front of us where we were walking and saw someone. 90% sure it was the same guy. I froze, and Amy tracked where I was looking and grabbed my arm again, and we went off the trail to some place that I didn't recognize. We ran for a bit, then went back on the trail thinking that we'd lost the guy. We looked back, and he was right fucking behind us, sprinting full speed towards us. Amy, still clinging to my arm, began running and pulling me with her, and she asked me, "Which way should we turn?" while pointing towards the woods and then pointing to some area I really didn't know how to get back home from. Now, it was dark out, so we obviously couldn't go into the woods. With little thinking, we went towards the area I didn't really recognize, and we kept running, and we kept looking back. He was still there. We saw some lady in the distance, and we immediately rushed over to her. My throat was so sore I could barely breathe, and the lady was on her phone just standing there, and we told her, "We're being chased. Please, can we stay with you for a minute?" That bitch completely paid no mind to us, as if this was a normal thing for her to hear, but at least it was the last time we saw the man following us. Amy tried getting on her phone, but it was dead, and I got mine out too, but I didn't have any data, and I couldn't go on Google Maps to find our way back home. Slowly, I figured out where we were, but I still wasn't too sure how to get back home from there. I looked around, and we began to walk towards the way I thought was correct. Finally, we walked until I recognized where we were, so I led the rest of the way, still paranoid that that guy was behind us, and we kept looking back. In order to get back home, we were forced to go the rest of the way through the woods, and though I thought that was a horrible idea, at least we were still together. After all, I did see my friend as a big sister. I don't know what would have happened if she wasn't there, but I don't think I really want to know either. We got through the woods and I pulled out my phone flashlight because at that point it was totally dark. I was shaking, and Amy was also tense. We made it back home safely, and we never told anyone about the story. It was just kind of our little secret. We weren't actually supposed to leave the house, especially as it got dark. But the experience stayed with us, well, at least for me. Anyway, a few months after that happened, I was watching some YouTube documentaries, some true crime stuff. It was based in the same exact area where we got chased. I mean, even the images used in the video were of the literal same street where we got chased. It was about some kid that apparently murdered his whole family over a video game. I mean, pretty graphic stuff. I told my mom about it, and she told me, "Didn't you know that area is dangerous? It's probably the most dangerous area in our town." I was shocked. I didn't even tell her the story of what happened to me and Amy, but after that, I did. I don't think she took me very seriously. But I hope this goes to show you that you can't trust anyone, and you should be careful going anywhere as a young woman, especially at night, because you never know what might happen, even if you are with someone else. To this day, I still think to myself, what would have happened if me and Amy hadn't reacted quicker? Uncle Josh note, I have no idea if this happened in the 80s, but that sounds like a typical parent response from back then. Yeah, that's a dangerous area. Yeah, let me tell you the story about what happened there. Okay, whatever. Yeah, that's growing up Gen X, kids. Parents who loved you but had no idea where you were and, frankly, didn't care. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like me to narrate, email it to unclejosh.truescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you're catching this on YouTube and you like what you heard and saw, why not give the video a thumbs up, share it with a friend, leave a comment. I'd love to know what you thought of the stories. It's all free and it all helps out with the algorithms, so I appreciate it. Follow me on social media, and if you'd like to take your support a step further, find a link to my Patreon page in the description and consider getting some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. A link to my TeePublic storefront is also in the description. Everyone, be excellent to each other, and until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything: a ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.